Hmm. Hello, how are you? Welcome back. Demolition. Let's just see where we left off.
Trigger warning for the first section. Chapter 22. Trigger warning for the first section. Read safely. It was early Saturday morning when Izuku walked into the villain rehabilitation building. Eri had fallen asleep on the train ride over and was currently being held by her papa while she drooled onto his shoulder. Kendo was right beside him, walking close enough that her shoulder bumped into him every other step while she chewed on the inside of her cheek, her nerves evident to Izuku even without the use of empathy. Yuki and his girlfriends had wanted to come as well to pay their respects to their daughter's hero, but that many people coming to visit didn't seem like something a secure facility would allow. It was a testament to Nejire's greater experience as a parent that she was able to see through Yuki's crocodile tears and convince their daughter they would be able to come next time. The villain rehabilitation organization itself went by the name of Phoenix and was privately funded by people like Nizu and other like-minded philanthropists that looked at villains and saw them for the people they were instead of the cartoonish monsters the media made them out to be. In today's society, once someone was branded as a villain, their life was all but over, no other paths left to them but a life of crime. This was the standard for criminals even before quirks only making the issue worse. Back then it was referred to as the lifer trap. After checking in as visitors and donning their name badges, they were escorted to a small room with a camera in the corner. The room, like much of the building, had hints to its past as a psychiatric hospital, even if it was well furnished and livened up to be less dull and depressing. The walls of the room were painted a calming teal that he couldn't help but to compare to Kendo's eyes. In one corner were several beanbag chairs and a small bookcase filled with well-worn books. At the very center of the room was a bolted-down steel stable with attached chairs. Filling one of those chairs to capacity was, who he had to assume, Kendo Rappa, aka the Rapper. The gargantuan man stood as they entered. Seeing the man now, he could better understand how he had managed to rip through an entire Yakuza organization. He could also see that the man had paid for his rampage in blood and flesh. The 8-foot Goliath was covered in scars in all shapes, even what appeared to be bullet wounds, and that was just what he could see while he wore his white short-sleeve jumpsuit. The left side of the man's face was heavily scarred, his left eye covered with an eye patch, his lip pulled back exposing teeth in a permanent snarl. His wild red hair and remaining teal eye bore a striking resemblance to Itsuka. Itsuka, the man rumbled in a gravelly voice that stood out in stark contrast to the soft emotions evident behind it. How? Itsuka began to ask, no doubt wondering how the man recognized her after not seeing her in so many years. The huge man walked up to Itsuka slowly, as if to not scare her off, and said, "You're my daughter," as if that answered the question, and really, it did. It didn't matter if it was a decade or a century, Izuku was confident he would recognize Eri and Yuki. Itsuka reached out to touch Rappa's face but stopped short. "Did you get these saving Eri?" "Yeah, but you should see the other guys," Rappa said with some pride. "Rapper?" Eri sleepily asked while rubbing the sleep from her eyes and the drool from the corner of her mouth. "Hey kid," the man answered before eyeing Izuku and saying, "You must be Izuku, Inko's kid." "I am, sir. I came because I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for Eri," Izuku said. Rappa grunted, his lone eye darting to Itsuka then back. "They hurt a child. I'm no hero, I'm Dash. I don't know what you've done or who you were, but you showed your true colors when you put your life on the line to save a scared child without a second thought. You are and always will be a hero to me and my family," Izuku interrupted. While Rappa stood there in silence processing Izuku's words, Eri reached a hand out and touched Rappa's heavily scarred arm, completely unafraid of the intimidating man. "Did they hurt you? Because of me?" Eri asked, clearly upset at the prospect. "They did, but I would do the same thing all over again even if it killed me. Kids deserve to be protected," he said, his lone eye darting to Itsuka again before continuing, "at any cost." Eri's eyes watered, but she didn't cry. Instead she reached out for a hug. Rappa seemed taken aback as he looked to Izuku for permission, Izuku nodding reassuringly to the huge man. Rappa gingerly accepted the hug, his palm covering most of Eri's back as he held her. "Thank you," Eri said with a watery voice. "Anytime, shrimp," Rappa said, eyeing Izuku critically again. "He treating you good?" he asked, Eri completely missing the promise of violence in his tone. If the answer wasn't correct, her next words were likely far more important than she would ever realize. Eri lit up, her previously watery eyes alight with joy. "Yeah. Papa and my mamas are the best. I even have a sister now," she declared. Rappa's eyebrow raised. "Mamas? Sister? How old are you?" he asked Izuku. "Poly and adopted," Izuku answered simply, Rappa humming in understanding. Rappa set Eri on the ground and walked back to where he previously sat. "It's been what? 15 years? You could fit in my hand the last time I saw you, Itsuka. Would you tell me about yourself? Please?" "Sure," Itsuka said, her emotions telling Izuku that there was something left unsaid. Izuku sat across from Rappa and next to Itsuka with Eri in his lap so she could see over the table. Izuku remained respectfully quiet and Eri drew while Itsuka slowly opened up to her father over the course of 2 hours. Eri was currently over by the bookshelf picking out something to show off her reading to Rappa when Izuku asked the question that had been plaguing his curiosity. "You obviously care about Itsuka, so why did you stay away for so long?" Izuku asked. Rappa looked to Eri and back to Itsuka, his eyes becoming distant as if remembering something but remaining silent. "Did you not want to be there?" Itsuka asked, hurt. "Of course I did," he snapped in a whisper, a look of fury passing over his face before vanishing just as fast. He turned to make sure Eri didn't hear his outburst before sighing and continuing. "Your mom and I broke up soon after you were born, we just didn't work out. I still visited all the time to see you and help raise you despite that. Your mom's boyfriend wasn't a big fan of that, but I didn't care, I was going to be there for you," he said, his face turning grim and pausing. "Are you sure you want to hear this story? It isn't pretty," he asked, Itsuka nodding immediately. "It happened when you were 3. I came over like I always did after work and let myself in. Your mother was working late and I wanted to make sure you were taken care of. The house was too quiet, the door to your room was cracked. Your mom's boyfriend was asking you to do something that I won't repeat. You saw me through the crack in the door," he paused, closing his eyes tightly. "I'll never forget how scared and confused you looked. I didn't black out, I made the conscious choice to beat him into a puddle. Your mom, she didn't believe me. I did time and when I got out she wouldn't let me see you anymore. Without you, without my daughter, I spiraled. I think I was just looking for a good place to die." Tears threatened to fall from Itsuka's eyes as she held her hands over her mouth. Izuku was shocked into silence. "It was your first kill, you had to know there was no going back, so why?" Itsuka asked, her voice hollow. "You're my daughter," Rappa said simply, yet answering everything. Itsuka stood and rushed around the table, Rappa standing as well just in time for her to pull him into a hug that held the emotions of a lost decade and a half. "Dad," Itsuka whispered into the giant man's chest. "My little firecracker," Rappa whispered, choking on his words. The next day Izuku found himself watching the UA staff train their newly evolved quirks in one of the mock cities. It was humbling to say the least. Hound Dog's quirk had taken a frightening turn when evolved, he more accurately resembled a hellhound than a mere dog. His brown fur with black stripes was now as dark as pitch, his eyes blazed the glow of hellfire, flames licked out of his maw when it opened. It wasn't just his appearance that had changed, no. He was not only stronger but he was capable of breathing out a short-range flame cone that was capable of melting steel. Ectoplasm's clone limit had shot up from 30 to an easy 60, if he pushed himself he could make double that number. He was currently using his clones as sparring partners against his fellow teachers. Power Loader's evolution wasn't as flashy as some of the others, but it was a substantial upgrade nonetheless. His iron-tipped fingers were now diamond-tipped, making him capable of digging through anything. Vlad King could always regenerate his blood faster than he could spend it with his quirk, but now he could just simply regenerate nearly any wound. His regeneration might not be as strong as Nomu's, but still it would keep him safe in nearly any situation. Cementoss now had far greater control over all things concrete and didn't need to be the epicenter. Entire skyscrapers rose in seconds without Cementoss even needing to be near them. All he needed was to be touching concrete that was connected to the area within line of sight. Snipe was taking down ectoplasm clones all over the city while calling out shots. His quirk was now able to specify where he hit as well as being able to control how strong it hit, up to the bullet's natural force. Present Mix evolution made him able to deepen the base of his scream at the cost of range, making him capable of bringing down the skyscrapers Cementoss was making for target practice. Anytime someone got tired they went to where Lunch Rush had a row of barbecues set up, a pair of floating white gloves manning each. His quirk was now capable of infusing the food he made with restorative properties not dissimilar to cell activation. Anyone that ate the food found their stamina restored and their minor wounds healed. Even Fuyamai was here at Izuku's insistence that if she was watching his children she needed every advantage possible. She was obviously out of her depth but was doing her best to train her newly evolved quirk. Her ability to create snow out of thin air was now capable of creating 5 semi-sentient snow golems. The golems didn't seem to melt in the sun or even with the application of mild heat, and when destroyed they merely reformed themselves. In appearance the golems took on a humanoid shape with no face save for 2 eyes made of blue ice. Before Izuku knew it the sports festival was upon them. The 2 weeks had flown right by with the amount of hellish training he and his class were doing. Izuku had put together personalized training regimens for each member of Class 1A and they were being graded on how well they followed those plans. All Might had done something similar but more focused on teamwork drills. Those weren't quite as demanding since they focused on building teamwork instead of pushing the upper limits of their quirks and bodies. The only one that struggled in the drills was Todoroki. He barely even participated. Even Bakugo seemed to be making a conscious effort to at least try and work together, even if he snapped out every suggestion and ruthlessly criticized everyone else's plans. In fact, both All Might and Eraserhead seemed to be increasingly frustrated with Todoroki. They often pulled the boy aside to talk to him, with the end result of Todoroki storming off each and every time. Currently, Izuku was taking Nejire and their daughters to their seats for the sports festival. He still couldn't believe how well Nejire had taken it when he told her about One for All and all the danger that came along with it. She had apparently suspected something from the beginning. Her response was to simply tell him that he was stuck with her and Yuki no matter what came knocking. Some people might confuse her inquisitive nature with airheadedness, but that simply wasn't the case. She was much sharper than she let on. Looking over at the woman in question he couldn't help but to stare. She had a glow about her since joining the relationship that brightened everything around her. It had only been 2 weeks and he already couldn't imagine a future without her. She wore a beige cardigan that went down to her knees, and under that she wore a gray dress and black tights. Eri wore a periwinkle t-shirt dress and was resting her head on Nejire's shoulder. Yuki wore a matching t-shirt dress but emerald in color and was doing much of the same on his shoulder. The both of them had wanted to be carried since the stairs were too hard. He knew that one day they would claim to be too old to be carried, so he was going to take every chance he had to carry them until that dreadful day. "You're staring," Nejire commented with a wry smile at having caught him. "You're beautiful," Izuku explained simply. When they entered the UA faculty seating area, Izuku realized he had overlooked something crucial. He had forgotten to tell his moms about Nejire joining his relationship and the small matter that they had a new grandchild. Inko shot from her seat and pointed at his and Nejire's joined hands, then gasping again when she noticed that Izuku was the one carrying Yuki and Nejire was carrying Eri. GGR Inko stuttered out of sheer elation. Anan said. Grandbabies. Plural. Nemuri shouted at the top of her lungs before leaping over chairs and people to get to them. Vlad King shot up as well with a, what? Hato's little girl? Has she called Himiko mama yet? Get it on video. Yuki, these are my mom's and Himiko's dad. Which makes them your grandparents if you want, Izuku explained to Yuki, who was looking between the nearly rabid adults and him. Daddy, what's a grandparent? Yuki asked innocently, his mom's nearly fainting at hearing his daughter refer to him as such. At the question, Izuku could feel Nejire's mood drop, likely feeling guilty even if not having parents was wildly out of her control. Izuku squeezed Nejire's hand and caught her eye with a reassuring look. A grandparent loves you like Nejire and I do, but will probably let you get away with more and spoil you rotten, he teased and explained simultaneously before delivering a kiss to the child's forehead. Grandma Inko always has candy in her purse, Eri whispered. Nejire gently lifted off the ground with her quirk and kissed him on the cheek before taking Yuki into her other arm. For luck, now get going, she commanded softly. Class 1A sat in silence, nerves high as they anxiously awaited the start of the sports festival. To some this may have been a mere sporting event, but to them this was the beginning of their hero career. This was where they had the chance to show the world who they were and what they stood for. While everyone else was in their PE uniforms, Mei and Momo stood out in their hero costumes complete with support gear due to the fact that they were also support course students and they were allowed to bring anything they had personally made. Izuku felt a deep sorrow suddenly that dulled the world's color. Nana. He thought. Yeah, it's me, I just wanted to wish you luck and tell you congrats on becoming a dad again, she said within his mind, her voice ragged. Thank you, Nana. If you want to talk, I'm here. You aren't alone, Torino, Toshi, and I miss you, he thought. Thanks, I might take you up on that. Seeing you three sounds nice, she admitted with a trace of hope in her tone. And then she, along with the accompanying sorrow, vanished once more. It was then that Todoroki stood from his seat and approached Izuku like a man on a mission. Looking at it objectively, I think you're stronger than me, he admitted. Izuku shrugged, not wanting to gloat but not disagreeing. Even so, I'm going to beat you, the heterochromatic boy declared. Izuku stood and looked down at the boy in confusion, then at the rest of the class, their determination palpable to him. You really think you're the only one with something to prove? He asked, a little incredulous at the necessity of the declaration of war. Minutes later the whole of the first-year classes walked onto the field to the sounds of thunderous applause and the voice of President Mike announcing each course. They might not be getting the same attention 1A has been, but don't underestimate them. Men, women, and gentle thems, I present Class 1B. President Mike shouted. Izuku looked to the class to see if he could glean any information on how their quirks might have evolved. There were only two that appeared different. Shiozaka's vine hair had small yellow flowers growing out of the vines. Tokage appeared to have a lizard tail now, complete with green scales. She noticed him looking and winked at him. Were her dark green eyes always slitted? She then stuck her tongue out at him, revealing that it was not only a dark purple in color but forked as well. Midnight cracked her whip, silencing everyone. That's better, she purred into her mic. If ever there was a time that Izuku wished he could switch off empathy, it was now, as he did his best to ignore the outpouring of attraction his peers and the crowd had for his mama. Representing the first years is Midoriya Izuku from Class 1A, come on up. She said, with a crack of her whip accentuating the end of her sentence. Izuku walked towards the stage to the sound of hushed reassurances from his girlfriends and the annoyed whispers of some other courses claiming that the hero course always got all the attention. His mama gave him a reassuring smile filled with maternal pride. She had personally trained him in media relations and public speaking for years. He had come a long way from the stuttering mess he once was. Izuku grabbed the mic and made direct eye contact with as many of the students in the other courses as possible. This event is the chance to show the world who you are, no matter what course you're in. Show them that all of you deserve to be here. Show them that each and every student of UA goes plus, ultra. He yelled, not only the other courses joining in but the crowd as well. Midnight fanned herself as he walked off stage, pride radiating off her. Such passion. Such youth. They'll need it in, she said, pausing as a wheel spun on a screen behind her. King of the Hill. She yelled out as the wheel stopped. A little shorter than I would have liked, but I didn't want to keep you waiting any longer. Let me know what you thought. Favorite part? Least favorite? Chapter 23. Hill was a pretty loose definition for the mountain of concrete he was looking at. The hill was at least 100 feet tall with a flat top just big enough for two opponents to fight. The slope of the hill was nearly a 45-degree angle. The hundreds of contestants had one hand on walls of the stadium forming a circle around the hill. Once the buzzer sounded, they would have to cross around 100 feet of open ground before they could even begin their climb. Do I have to be here? Aizawa droned over the speakers. I wish I could be closer too. Present Mike screamed into his microphone. Ugh! Hitachi groaned next to Izuku in embarrassment, his hand dragging down his face. At least they don't wear a dominatrix outfit as their hero costume, Izuku commiserated. Ha! I can't even imagine how you feel, Hitachi said. It wouldn't be so bad if I couldn't feel everyone's attraction to her, Izuku lamented. Hitachi laid a hand on Izuku's shoulder. That's rough, buddy. Rules are simple. The higher on the hill, the more points you get per second. Anything goes, but you'll only get points while in contact with the ground. Present Mike explained. Start, Eraserhead said unceremoniously just before a buzzer sounded throughout the stadium. The ground around Izuku cratered from the force of his jump before he flew off towards the top of the hill. He landed first, Black Cowl snapping into position as he readied himself to defend his position. After the 2 weeks of intensive training, he was not only able to push Black Cowl to 40%, but it was now capable of covering his hands and feet. Looking around, he could see that the students without mobility-enhancing quirks were barely 10 feet from their starting positions. One entire half of the stadium was frozen, the contestants frozen in place with Todoroki running ahead of them. He also saw that there were more people capable of flight than he had anticipated. Rin Hiryu was covered head to toe in green scales, draconic wings beating in the air. Pony Tsunatri was riding on one of her horns as if it was a witch's broom, while 7 more horns floated beside her. Kybara-sen's arms and legs were spinning in a blur so fast that he was creating cyclones of air powerful enough to give him flight. Izuku couldn't believe his eyes when he saw what Fukidashi Manga was doing. He was driving a colorful clown car that looked as if he had pulled it straight out of a gag manga. Tokage Setsuna's head flew with a swarm of what looked to be puzzle pieces comprising the rest of her body behind her. Since the pieces of her body didn't appear to be nude, he assumed she had managed to get a DNA-infused uniform. Bakugo was flying low to the ground with the aid of small explosions. Turning, he saw Mei traveling faster than he thought was possible for her suit. Had she upgraded the thrusters? The skeletal-like thrusters that made up her wings were spread wide as she descended like an avenging angel. The moment she landed, she had her Exodus pistol raised directly at his face. Izuku raised his forearms to block. The moment after the first shot landed, he would counter. The round struck with the force of a kick from Rumi, the electricity of the Electrogal round not traveling through his carapace of energy. He lowered his guard and prepared to rush his girlfriend, but danger sense blared and time slowed. Mei wasn't lining up a second shot. Stabilizers had unfolded from her armor around her feet and drilled deep into the concrete. The 8 thrusters that made up her wings were angled over her shoulders and pointed directly at him. He tried to dodge out of the way, but he found that his feet were encased in pink riot foam from her mayflies. He could break through the foam, but not fast enough. He would have to block whatever was coming. Exterminatus! May yelled through the speakers in her helmet. The thrusters roared to life and 8 beams of plasma combined into one. Izuku barely had time to raise his arms again before the beam of plasma hit him full force. The sleeves of his uniform evaporated as what amounted to an oversized plasma cutter struck him. The beam didn't get through Black Cowl, but it was getting hot. He could feel his skin beginning to burn. Periwinkle enveloped his entire world as something hit him hard enough to send him tumbling through the air and off the side of the hill. Righting himself, he saw Nejire land on the top of the hill wearing a slasher smile that was very much Himiko. Himiko's uniform didn't seem to be bursting at the seams around her curves, so she must have gotten a hold of a DNA uniform as well. "That's got a kick?" Himi Nejire said. May rose to her feet behind Himiko, the dust cloud kicked up by the attack having concealed her, her armor scored but functioning, her anchors having kept her from getting launched off the hill. Himiko whirled, having sensed her movement, but May was faster in her power armor. The knuckles on May's fist crackled with electricity as she swung for Himi Nejire's gut. The electricity arced to its target, causing the muscles that would normally help to absorb a punch to lock up just before the fist collided, sending Himiko tumbling and clutching her stomach over the edge of the lip of the hill. Izuku slammed onto the top of the hill once more, but so too did someone else. Rumi landed and seamlessly transitioned into a roundhouse to May's back that sent her over the edge after Himiko. Her ruby eyes snapped to him alight with excitement. "We haven't had a proper spar since you figured out Black Cowl. Let's see if you still can't beat me," she roared before rushing him fast and low to the ground. She wanted to get under his guard? Fine. He raised his joined fists in the air before bringing the axe handle blow down to intercept Rumi. Rumi smirked as she stopped short, the ground beneath her cracking from the sudden shift. She used her momentum to pivot into a kick that sailed over his joined fist straight for his head. He was only barely able to shift so that he took the blow in the shoulder instead, the hit sounding like the boom of thunder. There it was, the main reason he could never beat her. He was probably as strong as her now, maybe even more so, but she didn't have to plan out each attack like he did. She had honed her animalistic instincts into a finely tuned weapon to the point that everything was just reflex. Izuku's left foot dug into the concrete to avoid being toppled by the kick. When the second kick came blurring at him, he was able to block it with his forearm and throw a punch at Rumi's jaw. Instead of dodging the blow, Rumi grabbed it and wrapped herself around his arm in a flying arm bar, her impossibly muscled legs squeezing the life out of him before he even hit the ground. Every muscle in Rumi's body was dedicated to the task of breaking his arm, her gym uniform ripping at the seams as her arms and legs bulged with effort. Izuku was able to resist her enough to keep his arm from breaking immediately, but he didn't know for how long. He activated empathy and began channeling despair into everyone around him. "It'll take more than that to break my spirit," Rumi bellowed in defiance as she redoubled her efforts to break his arm. Izuku activated float and lifted Rumi and himself off the ground before rocketing back into it with Rumi between him and the concrete. Rumi gasped as the air was knocked from her, her death grip on him and his arm loosening enough to escape. Nejire watched as Izuku fought their girlfriends for control of the top of the hill. May's laser attack looked like it was about to overwhelm Izuku if Himiko wearing her form hadn't intervened. How fast could May fly now? Could that laser carbonize cells? What was its range? Himiko looked so happy to be wearing her form, could she pull off that smile too? Who was faster, herself or Himiko wearing her form? She wanted to find out. Oguro and Midoriya duke it out for the crown as they literally blow away the competition. Present Mike yelled over the speakers. The fight between Rumi and Izuku was escalating to the point that nobody else could get near them, the force of the blows creating booming shockwaves and gale force gusts of wind that sent anyone seeking to interfere back down the hill. They didn't even seem to notice the intensity that their fight was getting to, or the people that attempted to take the top of the hill and were subsequently blown off it. They were in their own little world as they fought with the intensity most pro heroes couldn't hope to match. Who was stronger? Faster? How much stronger was Black Cowl compared to Full Cowl? Was Izuku not using smoke screen because he knew it would just get blown away? Was Rumi too strong to be captured with Black Whip? Was Rumi immune to empathy or just fighting through it? 1B looked to be content where they were. They had banded together and took up a defensive position near the top of the hill on one side. On the other, 1A were fighting amongst themselves near the top and anyone from the other courses that tried to ascend. 1B was on the opposite side and it was difficult to make out their quirks from the camera feeds. It wasn't fair, she wanted to see. Nejire was brought out of her observations by Eri tugging on her clothes to get her attention. "Mama, why are Papa and Mama's fighting?" she asked, sounding both confused and worried. "I don't like it," Yuki said with a light tremble in her voice, her ears flat to her head. Nejire smiled at her daughters reservedly and bounced them on her knees. "Don't worry babies, it's like a game. They're showing off so they can prove they'll make good heroes," Nejire tried to explain in a way they would understand. "But Papa and Mamas are already the best heroes," Eri countered, sounding less worried but even more confused. "Yeah," Yuki agreed, her ears popping back up. "I agree. Let's cheer them on," Nejire said, trying to inject some excitement. Her girls both raised their little fists in the air and began shouting encouragement as loud as they could manage. "Did you get that on video?" Inko whispered, a little panicked. I got it," Anan whispered back. "Send it to me." Ken Whisper shouted. "Me too." Mr. Yagi, who she now knew was All Might, said, not even bothering to whisper. Now that she knew, she was kicking herself for not seeing the similarities between his personality and All Might. Nejire's attention was brought back to the fight by a sudden drop in temperature. Turning back to look, she saw that a glacier now covered the side of the hill that 1B was on. Looks like she found where Todoroki was. It wasn't looking good for 1B if they couldn't get out of that. A creaking sound filled the air as cracks began to rapidly form in the ice. Not a second later the glacier exploded and in its place stood a giant Kodayui with her right fist held high and her left bicep flexing. Koday declared, the deep rumble of her giant voice carrying throughout the stadium. Was that her hero pose? It looked like she practiced. Maybe in the mirror? She wasn't naked. Did she get a DNA uniform like Himiko? Mirio must be jealous that those are so easy to come by now. The buzzer blared, signaling the end of the first event. There was still time left, so why did it end? The 42 participants still able to continue will move on to the next event. Present Mike announced. Don't underestimate wide-range attacks, Eraserhead commented. The camera all zoomed in to focus on the hundreds of participants covered head to toe in mushrooms who were trying and failing to stand at the base of the hill. The cameras then panned over to Komura Kinoko smiling and making a peace sign at the camera, then turning and patting the heads of little mushrooms with arms and legs. She had so many questions. Mount Lady spit out the takoyaki she had charmed the stall worker into giving her at what she had just seen on the breakroom's TV. You turned to Kamui Woods and wiped her mouth on her sleeve. I need her to intern with me. Help me fill out the form, please. She begged her boyfriend. You can do it yourself, consider it payback for always stealing my thunder, Shinji said. I said I was sorry, she whined while giving her best puppy dog eyes. That isn't fair, Shinji declared while crossing his arms. Whoa, Rumi and Izuku said in perfect unison at the sight of Koday. She was almost as big as Mount Lady. Izuku turned to Rumi. Her uniform had been reduced to shorts and a muscle tee, the same as his. Call it a draw? He asked. Rumi blew out an annoyed breath before answering, fine. Pretty sure I have a few fractures, Izuku admitted with a smile. Rumi gave a short laugh. Same, you hit way harder now. Izuku sidled up to her and threw her shoulder over his so they could help support each other's weight for the walk down the hill. They hobbled their way down the hill to where everyone was gathered away from the hill so that Cementos could remove it. Many were brushing off mushrooms and looking like they were about to pass out from exhaustion. Most of 1A was looking a bit battered and bruised while 1B looked ready for more. Mei approached them while carrying Himiko in a princess carry, the blonde clutching her midsection. My exterminatus worked great. The shock punch too. I think I broke her rib. Mei stated proudly. Definitely more than one, Himiko said with a wince. Maybe don't use that exterminatus attack on someone unless you know they can survive it, okay? Izuku asked. Sure, Mei agreed a little too easily. Tsu limped up to them, Okako supporting her weight with a shoulder. Okako was beaming with joy despite her black eye and bloodied knuckles. Don't worry, Ribbit. I cut my foot on Kiri's Hima, he's sharper than he looks, Tsu said. Was that a joke? Rumi asked with a half-smile. Tsu's only response was a languid wink that was so slow he couldn't be sure if it was actually a wink or just a one-eyed blink. Green vine snaked through the crowd, Shiozaka speaking once they had. Please, allow me to tend to your wounds. Small yellow flowers bloomed on the vines and released a cloud of pollen from each. As Izuku inhaled the pollen he could feel the fractures that cell activation was still working on mend immediately. Looking around, everyone was watching in awe as their wounds vanished. Kyoka marched up to him with anger rolling off of her. Before he could ask what was the matter, she grabbed his wrist and dragged him away. He could only shrug at his girlfriend's questioning looks as he let himself be taken away. She continued to drag him through the crowd until they reached the outskirts of the gathered students where Momo was sitting in the grass. What's Ren? He almost asked but stopped when he saw Momo's hands trembling and the distant look in her eye. She was doing fine until your quirk fucked with her emotions, Kyoka said through gritted teeth. He hadn't considered the possibility of empathy triggering panic attacks. He didn't like influencing people's emotions unless it was for combat or an emergency, but this counted as an emergency in his book and it was his fault. Izuku kneeled next to Momo as he channeled calm confidence into the ravenette. He watched as her ragged breathing evened out and her hands stopped trembling. I'm sorry, he said, turning to look both Momo and Kyoka in the eye. Kyo, I told you not to blame him, Momo said. Kyoka's rage-filled expression softened as she opened her mouth to speak, but Izuku beat her to it. It was my fault. I should have corrected the negative emotions at the end of the fight. It won't happen again, Izuku said. So you'll still use it? Kyoka asked, not accused. Please don't handicap yourself just because I'm incapable, Momo pleaded. Momo, Kyoka said softly. I'm not handicapping myself by being more careful with empathy, and you're not incapable, far from it in fact, Izuku stated, affection from both women scenting the air. After a short break to rest, get water, and replace damaged uniforms, the remaining participants met back on the field where Midnight strutted back onto the stage as the wheel of activities spun. Looking around, it seemed like everyone from the hero courses made the cut. The only two people that weren't in the hero program were a familiar small boy with grape-like hair and a stocky boy with a rock-like face. The next round will be, capture the flag. Each flag will be worth the combined point value of its team. She yelled before the screen changed to show the rankings from the last event and each person's point value for this event. Second place was Rumi and was worth 197 points, Mei was third with 194, Himiko was fourth with 191, each subsequent place worth 3 less points. Made sense. He was in first like he had thought, so he should have 200 points. So why was he worth 10 million? Heavy lies the head that wears the crown, Midnight purred. I definitely understand why authors complain about writing the sports festival. I also understand now why you never see King of the Hill in stories with the sheer amount of possible fights happening at the same time. With that said, I hope it turned out well. I would like take a moment and gloat that I predicted Hagakure's hair and eye color lol. HTTPS I'll probably be switching to Thursdays for releases, no promises.
Parts to be bullshit for now, you know that. But, Okay, I know the next chapters are gonna be the longest. We need the first so far, but you know, let's continue this. Let's stop for now. If I'm gonna probably I might continue this, but you know maybe I have to. Yeah, but I don't want to put all this one episode. All the first episode I wanted to do that, but you know we had some other episodes before, other chapters within it.